Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at what many would consider an absolute medical impossibility.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, on one side, you have the traditional psychiatric establishment, right?
Hmm.
And they say bipolar affective disorder type I is this severe, lifelong, relapsing condition.
Right.
And the consensus is that it absolutely requires permanent, heavy medication. But then on the other side, we have this radical research proposal.
It's an N of 1 single subject longitudinal case study.
Exactly. A case study from a patient who basically threw out the clinical playbook, hooked his brain up to an AI exoskeleton, and achieved over 30 years of complete neurological stability.
Which is unheard of.
Right, without ever stepping foot in a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
So if you are joining us today, you're the kind of learner who doesn't just want the surface level summary of like a medical anomaly.
You want to know the mechanics?
Yeah, you want to understand how this is even practically possible.
It is an incredible contrast, really, because historically, the entire medical model treats the psychiatric patient as just a passive recipient of care.
You get sick, you take the pill, you hope the symptoms fade.
Exactly. But this research brief, which, by the way, is titled Neuroadaptive Resilience and AI-Augmented Self-Regulation in Bipolar I, it completely re-envisions the patient.
As an active architect.
Right, an active, capable architect of their own neurological stability.
So the mission of this deep dive is to figure out how this one individual engineered this decades-long system of stability. We're going to explore how they successfully utilized AI.
And not as a therapist, which is key.
Right, as a cognitive prosthetic. We're even going to look at how they navigated the physiological nightmare of opioid cessation.
Right.
Without causing a psychiatric crisis.
It's just a rebellious, intensely structured approach to the human brain.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start?
Well, to really appreciate the magnitude of this research brief, we have to ground ourselves in the clinical baseline. If you open up the standard medical literature today, whether that's the Johns Hopkins Psychiatry Guide, the Mayo Clinic, or the NIH, they all define bipolar I in very specific terms.
Right, it's defined by these extreme poles.
Exactly.
You have manic episodes characterized by this severely elevated mood, racing thoughts, a massively decreased need for sleep.
Highly risky behaviors, too.
Yeah. And then you have the crash, right? The major depressive episodes, which is just this near total loss of vital energy and executive function.
And because those episodes can be so destructive, the standard treatment model across the board relies heavily on reactive pharmacological intervention.
So heavy mood stabilizers.
Right, like lithium or Devoprox, and often atypical antipsychotics. The entire clinical goal is basically to chemically suppress those acute episodes.
What about therapy, though?
Well, psychotherapy is usually recommended alongside it, sure.
Right.
But if you look closely at the literature, it's mostly there to ensure medication adherence.
Like making sure you take your pills and have basic lifestyle hygiene.
Exactly.
But the author of this brief argues that the standard medical literature has a massive blind spot here.
A huge one, yeah.
By focusing almost exclusively on those acute explosive episodes and just pill compliance, the clinical world tends to dismiss patient-developed management systems as merely anecdotal.
That's the crux of the issue right there. In standard clinical trials, researchers are looking at very short study windows.
Like what, 6 months?
6 months, maybe 24 months tops. But this brief introduces a hypothesis about the very long term. Module A focuses on neuroadaptive resilience.
Okay, what does that actually mean?
It proposes that decades of deliberate, structured self-regulation practice can actually produce measurable physical neuroplastic adaptation in the brain.
I want to dig into the physical brain science of that, because the brief references some really compelling research by Kerstad and colleagues.
Yes, the structural deficit research.
Right, pointing out that bipolar disorder involves a structural deficit, specifically hypoactivity in the dorsolateral and dorsomedial prefrontal cortex.
Which sounds like a mouthful, I know.
Yeah, how do we translate that?
Think of those areas, the DLPFC and DMPFC, as the brain's executive control center. They're the brakes.
Okay, the brain.
And deeper down in the limbic system, you have the amygdala, which acts as the engine of raw, unfiltered emotion.
Right.
In a typical brain, the prefrontal cortex sends signals down to the amygdala to regulate those emotions. But in bipolar I, those prefrontal brakes are underactive.
And what's crucial here is that this underactivity is present regardless of what mood state the person is in.
Exactly. It's a trait marker, a baseline structural deficit.
Sure, but I mean, psychiatric conditions aren't exactly a broken arm. You can't just put a cast on a mood swing and wait for the bone to knit.
No, you definitely can't.
So if the baseline deficit is structural, how does a behavioral system fix it without the chemical cast of lifelong medication?
What's fascinating here is that the brief doesn't claim to fix or reverse the structural deficit at all.
Wait, really?
Not at all. It emphasizes what it calls earned architecture. It's entirely about compensation.
Okay, earned architecture. How does that work?
When this individual repeatedly engages in intense cognitive reappraisal, meaning they consciously force themselves to reevaluate their emotional responses over and over, they are physically firing neurons.
Right, the whole neurons that fire together, wire together thing.
Precisely. Over 30 years, that deliberate practice physically myelinates new neural tracks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they are literally strengthening the top-down prefrontal regulation of that amygdala-driven emotion. It builds a completely new compensatory pathway.
Wait, so instead of just treating a broken leg with a permanent cast, which is essentially the standard model of relying solely on lifelong medication,
Yeah.
this N=1 study is suggesting that doing decades of intense, targeted physical therapy can build the mental muscles around the deficit so effectively that it functions almost like a new bone.
That is a perfect way to visualize it, yeah. And that completely upends the implicit clinical assumption that bipolar deficits are static and unmodifiable without medication.
To see how that earned architecture actually plays out in the day-to-day, we really need to look at the subjective experience of the author.
His personal writings are incredible for this.
Yeah, from his work, Not Every Year,
Mhm.
specifically a concept he calls the river in my head. He completely rejects the clinical imagery we're all so used to seeing.
You mean that classic, jagged, up and down waveform you see on every single chart explaining bipolar disorder?
Yes, that exact chart. He says that waveform always felt like someone else's drawing of someone else's life.
Which makes sense. It's a clinical abstraction.
Right. Instead, he asks you to take that vertical chart, rotate it 90 degrees, and lay it flat.
Oh, I love that imagery.
It becomes a river. Mania isn't a mountaintop he has to scale or a cliff he falls off. It's a fast-running current.
A current to be navigated.
Exactly. He feels wide, moving fast, aware of everything he's set in motion. And the depressive phase isn't a crash into a dark abyss.
It's a settling tide.
Right. The water slows down so he can clean up the mess the fast water made.
That reframing is profound because it shifts the entire goal of treatment.
How so?
Well, if bipolar is a river, the goal isn't to dam the river up or chemically freeze the water.
Right, you can't stop the river.
Exactly. The goal is to figure out how to navigate that current for more than 30 years without ever capsizing and requiring psychiatric hospitalization.
You have to build a really sturdy boat, or I guess in the language of Module C in the brief, you have to build engineered infrastructure.
Precisely. In this framework, longitudinal stability isn't defined merely as the absence of symptoms. It is treated as a highly engineered structure.
The brief brings in Stromberg's model here.
Right. Yes, which argues that instability itself is the core phenotype of bipolar disorder.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning it's not just about isolated manic or depressive episodes happening in a vacuum. It's a systems-level vulnerability to shifting states.
So how does this individual actually engineer that stability to handle those shifts?
The brief details some very rigid, interdependent protocols.
Like what?
Things like strict sleep-wake architecture, deliberate stimulus control, social rhythm maintenance, and continuous real-time state monitoring.
Okay, but I want to understand the why behind these. Take social rhythm maintenance, for example.
Sure.
Why does having lunch at the same time with the same people stop a manic episode?
It comes down to biological timekeeping. Humans rely on external cues called Zeitgebers.
Zeitgebers, literally time givers in German, right?
Exactly. Light is the most famous one, obviously, but social interactions are incredibly powerful Zeitgebers.
Really? Just talking to people?
Yeah. Having a regular conversation or eating a meal with others at the same time every day physically regulates the release of cortisol and melatonin in the brain.
Oh, wow. So it's chemical.
Very much so. By rigidly anchoring those social rhythms, the individual keeps their circadian clock locked in place.
Which prevents the biological drift that often triggers a manic upswing.
You got it.
What about stimulus control, like managing environmental inputs and information load?
That addresses the nervous system's allostatic load.
Which is the wear and tear on the body from chronic stress.
Right. Someone with bipolar has a highly reactive nervous system. If you don't control the flow of information, notifications, environmental
The
noise.
nervous system just gets flooded.
Exactly. And that sensory overload can trigger the amygdala to hit the panic button, which initiates a mood swing. Controlling the stimulus builds a levee against that flood.
Okay, I have to challenge this, though, because
Oh,
this sounds absolutely exhausting.
it does sound like a lot of work.
Right. If you have to build this massive, rigid infrastructure just to manage the daily river, monitor your Zeitgebers, and police your sensory inputs,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't that take up your entire life? The subject of this study is a designer, a writer,
Yeah.
an internet architect. How do you maintain high-level creative output or even just hold down a job with all this overhead?
It's a totally valid question, but it misses a counterintuitive truth about human psychology.
Which is,
Structure actually creates freedom.
okay, explain that.
Yes, initially building the infrastructure is incredibly demanding, but once those protocols become habits, once your physical and digital environments are designed to manage that cognitive load automatically, you actually free up executive function.
Oh, I see. You aren't waking up every day spending energy trying to decide how to manage your mood.
Exactly. The system manages the mood. The routine absorbs the daily friction of the disorder.
So the structure does the heavy lifting. But, even the best structure has weak points.
Of course.
The river metaphor is beautiful, but maintaining the banks of that river still takes cognitive effort. What happens when the depression tide rolls in and completely washes away your executive function?
That is the ultimate vulnerability in the system.
Right. And his solution to that vulnerability is what absolutely blew my mind. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, definitely. This is Module B, the integration of artificial intelligence.
And we need to clarify immediately what this is not.
Yes, please, because when people hear AI and mental health, they instantly picture AI therapy.
Like a chatbot counselor asking, "How was your day?" or "How does that make you feel?"
Completely. And the brief explicitly rejects that entirely.
Right, it's not a therapist at all.
Not at all. Drawing on Riva's enhanced cognitive scaffolding model, the brief outlines how this individual uses conversational AI as an externalized neuroprosthetic.
It's infrastructure, not an intervention. But wait, what does an externalized neuroprosthetic actually mean in practice?
Well, it means the AI performs specific functions to compensate for state-dependent cognitive deficits.
Okay, give me an example.
One of the main functions is acting as persistent context.
Persistent context.
Right. When a person with bipolar I shifts from a baseline state into severe depression, they experience state-dependent memory loss.
Meaning they literally lose the thread of their own narrative.
Exactly. They can't remember what it feels like to be motivated or what their long-term priorities even are.
Wow, so the AI acts as a persistent memory bank that holds that coherent narrative across the mood shifts.
Yes. It holds on to his baseline reality when his brain temporarily can't.
That makes so much sense. The brief also talks about pattern deviation detection. Is the AI somehow analyzing him in real time? Like,
Yeah.
it reads his writing and tells him he's manic?
In a way, yes. This is crucial for catching an episode early.
How does it catch it?
When someone is entering a hypomanic phase, their linguistic patterns subtly change before their conscious awareness does.
Like they start typing differently.
Yeah, their syntax might become highly complex, they might type much faster, or jump tangentially between ideas.
And because the brain feels chemically good in that moment, the individual almost always misses the warning signs.
Right, but the AI functions as a completely neutral, analytical mirror.
So it can flag those linguistic deviations in his drafting or journaling
Yeah.
and reflect them back to him.
Exactly, and without any of the emotional baggage or judgment that a human observer might bring.
That is wild. It's a highly observant mirror that doesn't judge. And what about when the opposite happens? When the executive function collapses during a depressive state?
That's where the third function comes in. Workflow continuity.
Okay, how did that work?
During depression, just the act of breaking a large project down into actionable steps feels like climbing a mountain.
The activation energy required is simply too high.
Exactly. So the AI takes over that specific executive function.
It does the breaking down for him.
Yes. It maintains the structured task architecture, breaking things down into micro steps, which drastically reduces the cognitive energy required for the person to just keep moving forward.
So it isn't a therapist asking you to dig into your childhood trauma. It's literally a cognitive exoskeleton.
I love that analogy.
When your internal spine, your executive function starts to buckle under the weight of a depressive episode, the AI is the external scaffolding holding your priorities upright.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this solves a massive problem in cognitive science.
Which one?
The cognitive offloading versus overload paradox.
Oh, right. Usually when we rely on technology, our own cognitive skills atrophy.
Think about how bad our spatial navigation has gotten since we all started using GPS.
Right. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Exactly. But here, the AI is positioned as an augmentation of a highly developed existing self-regulation system.
The human is still steering the ship, setting the goals, and doing the emotional regulation.
The AI just provides the scaffolding when the structural integrity wavers. It extends the user's capabilities without diminishing their earned architecture.
See, a system like this sounds great in theory, or, when the waters of that river are relatively calm.
Sure.
But to prove how resilient this patient-developed architecture truly is, we have to look at its ultimate stress test.
Module D, the opioid cessation.
Exactly. In his personal writings, the author talks openly about the opioid years.
Yeah, his descriptions of that time are incredibly vivid.
He writes about the fluorescent purgatory of waiting rooms in pain clinics. He describes how people didn't walk into those places because they were reckless junkies. They walked in because they were hurting, and the doorway looked like care.
It's a really empathetic way to view it.
But eventually, he realized the physiological and psychological cost was simply too high. And he successfully achieved total opioid cessation.
Which is phenomenal, but we really have to view this accomplishment through the lens of traditional medical assumptions to understand why it's a whole module in this research brief.
Right, because attempting to withdraw from long-term opioid use is a massive physiological trauma.
Huge. Your nervous system goes into overdrive, you get spikes in norepinephrine, agonizing physical pain, severe anxiety.
And the general medical consensus is that attempting this while simultaneously managing a highly volatile condition like bipolar is incredibly dangerous.
It is widely assumed to be a guaranteed recipe for severe psychiatric destabilization.
Almost always requiring inpatient hospitalization.
Exactly.
But he didn't end up in a hospital. He didn't destabilize his bipolar disorder. How is that physically possible?
Because of what the brief terms the nested architecture model.
The nested architecture model. Unpack that for me.
He didn't treat opioid withdrawal as a separate independent crisis to be fought on a brand new battlefield.
He didn't abandon his existing systems to focus solely on the withdrawal.
Right. Instead, the cessation was embedded within the existing bipolar stability framework.
So all the stuff we talk about, the sleep protocols, the real-time state monitoring, the social zeitgebers.
They absorbed the shock.
Oh, wow.
The decades of earned neuroadaptive resilience provided a massive pre-existing containment structure.
So the exact same self-regulation muscles he developed over 30 years of navigating the river in his head. They became the scaffolding that contained the opioid withdrawal.
Precisely. In systems theory, the withdrawal wasn't a system collapse. It was treated merely as a severe perturbation within an already deeply stable system.
This completely challenges the foundation of how we treat comorbidities.
It really does.
Because the medical establishment loves to silo these issues, right? You have addiction medicine in one building, psychiatry in another building across town, and pain management somewhere else entirely.
And they rarely talk to each other effectively.
But this study argues that if you help a patient build a robust systems-level infrastructure for emotional and cognitive stability, that same infrastructure can absorb secondary shocks that would otherwise destroy them.
It is a phenomenal synthesis of data and lived experience, and that really is why this research brief is so important.
It isn't just a memoir or an interesting survival story.
No, it is a rigorously proposed mixed methods field study. It combines quantitative biometric data, AI interaction logs, and decades of qualitative archival records to definitively prove a point.
And that point is that patient-directed stability systems are a viable, severely under-recognized treatment modality.
It shifts the entire paradigm of psychiatric care.
The patient is no longer viewed as this fragile collection of symptoms waiting for a chemical fix. They can be an active, capable engineer of their own clinical outcomes.
We spend so much time in the medical field staring at the clinical data, searching for the average response, that we completely forget to look at the outliers.
The people who are actively surviving and outperforming the data. Which leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to mull over. We've just spent this deep dive exploring how a single human being, operating completely outside the traditional clinical gaze, engineered an internal compass, an incredibly sophisticated AI exoskeleton, and a neurological containment structure capable of outperforming standard psychiatric models for 30 years.
It's an incredible achievement.
But look at the components of that success. The medical establishment has historically viewed subjective patient experiences as mere anecdotes, right? Subordinate to clinical trials.
Right.
But if one person can build all of this on their own, what other life-saving architectures are currently trapped inside the minds of patients just waiting to be studied? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.